1972. 1972 was one of the darkest years in aviation history, worse than anything seen since World War II. In just 12 months, nearly 2,400 people died in 72 airline crashes. It was brutal, and the year had barely begun when the first tragedy struck. BEA Flight 548 was headed from London to Brussels packed with passengers, 118 in total. The airline was dealing with a pilot strike and was flying at full capacity. Takeoff seemed fine at first, but just a minute in, climbing through 1,200 feet, things went horribly wrong. The plane started losing speed. Alarms went off, the controls vibrated, but the captain didn't react in time. The jet stalled, rolled to the left, and fell out of the sky. It slammed into a field near Staines. No one survived. The investigation was chilling. The captain had retracted the flaps too early, causing the plane to lose lift. He was also suffering from a heart condition no one knew about. The co-pilot was too inexperienced, and with an off-duty pilot sitting in the cockpit, the crew was distracted. After this, Britain made cockpit voice recorders mandatory and pushed hard for better crew coordination. But then came another blow. Just months later, Interflug Flight 450 took off from Berlin with 156 vacationers. Soon after, the crew noticed smoke and serious elevator control issues. A 570-degree Fahrenheit hot air duct had ruptured, sparking a fire in the cargo bay. The crew had no idea how bad it was. There were no smoke detectors back there, no warning systems. Eventually, the fire destroyed the tail. The plane broke apart midair, crashing near Königs Wusterhausen. No one made it out alive. But the nightmare didn't end in 1972. Even after all the loss, all the warnings, it kept happening. 2 years later, aviation was hit by another wave of devastation. And this time, one crash would change everything. 1974. 1974 was a heartbreaking year in aviation history, one of the worst the world had ever seen at the time. And at the center of it was a single disaster so massive it stunned the entire world. Turkish Airlines Flight 981. The flight was on its way from Istanbul to London with a stop in Paris. It was packed, filled with extra passengers from British Airways because of a strike. Just minutes after takeoff from Paris, at around 11,000 feet, something went horribly wrong. The rear cargo door suddenly blew off. The pressure inside the plane dropped instantly. The floor of the cabin collapsed, snapping the control cables underneath. The pilots couldn't control the jet. It nosedived into the Ermenonville forest near Paris. All 346 people on board were killed instantly. The investigation revealed a shocking truth. The cargo door wasn't locked properly. The latches were worn down, warning systems had been disabled, and the plane gave the illusion that everything was secure when it wasn't. It was a disaster caused by poor maintenance and dangerous design flaws. After this crash, major changes were made to how cargo doors are built and checked before flight. But 1974 wasn't done yet. Later that year, Eastern Airlines Flight 212 was approaching Charlotte in thick fog. The pilots were distracted and didn't notice how low they were flying. The plane hit trees just over 3 miles from the runway and exploded. Out of 82 people on board, 72 died. The crash was blamed on poor coordination in the cockpit and failure to monitor altitude properly in low visibility. New rules were introduced for safer approaches in fog and better terrain awareness for pilots. But even with years of progress, regulation, and better training, the skies were still far from safe. Just 3 years after a series of crashes shook 1974, 1977 delivered yet another devastating lesson, showing that even a single misstep in the air can cost hundreds of lives. 1977. 1977 went down in history as the deadliest year in aviation because of one horrifying crash that took 583 lives in a single moment. It began when KLM Flight 4805 and Pan Am Flight 1736, both massive Boeing 747s, were diverted to Tenerife after a bomb threat at another airport. The small airfield was packed, and a thick fog settled over the runway. Communication between the pilots and air traffic control quickly became confusing and unclear. Then, the unimaginable happened. The KLM jet, thinking it had clearance, began racing down the runway for takeoff, right as the Pan Am plane was still taxiing on the same runway. In the dense fog, neither crew saw the other until it was too late. The two giants collided with a huge fireball followed by. 248 people on the KLM flight died. On the Pan Am jet, only 61 out of 396 survived. It was and still is the deadliest crash in aviation history. Afterward, aviation completely changed how pilots and controllers communicate, introducing strict radio phrase rules and cockpit coordination training. But the tragedies didn't stop there. Southern Airways Flight 242 flew straight into a violent thunderstorm. Hail destroyed both engines and the crew had no power left. They tried to land on a highway in Georgia, but the jet crashed into a gas station and cars. 63 on board died, along with 9 people on the ground. It pushed airlines to improve storm avoidance and pilot training. Then Dan Air Flight 1008, descending into Tenerife, went off course in heavy fog and crashed into a mountain. All 146 were killed. The skies quieted briefly after 1977, but the calm didn't last. In 1985, disaster struck again. And this time, the scale of loss stunned the world all over again. 1985. In the year 1985, more than 2,100 people lost their lives in air disasters around the world, making it the deadliest year since the 1970s. And it all started with Japan Airlines Flight 123. On August 12th, a packed Boeing 747 took off from Tokyo heading to Osaka, but just 12 minutes into the flight, there was a loud bang. The rear pressure bulkhead, repaired years earlier after a tail strike, suddenly gave way. The plane lost its vertical stabilizer and all its hydraulics. The crew had no real control. For over half an hour, the aircraft fought the air, diving, climbing, shaking violently until it slammed into Mount Takamagahara. Out of 524 people on board, only 4 survived. Investigators later found the repair had been done wrong. Over time, cracks formed, leading to the disaster. The fix was flawed, and nobody caught it in time. Then came Aeroflot Flight 8381. On May 3rd, this plane was descending when it collided mid-air with a military aircraft over Ukraine. The 2 jets broke apart instantly, their pieces raining into the fields below. All 94 people aboard both planes died. The real cause behind it was the air traffic control errors. Civil and military controllers weren't communicating, and radar coverage was weak. No one realized the planes were on a collision course until it was too late. And just before the year's end on December 12th, Aero Air Flight 1285 crashed after takeoff in icy Newfoundland. The plane barely lifted off before stalling and crashing, killing all 256 US soldiers and crew. Ice on the wings was likely to blame, but poor data from an old flight recorder left many questions unanswered. 3 devastating crashes, 1 unforgettable year. 1985 exposed the cracks in systems, in maintenance, and in oversight that cost hundreds their lives. 1987. 1987 brought 2 devastating crashes that exposed terrifying flaws in aircraft design, maintenance, and air traffic control. And the top of that list was LOT Polish Airlines Flight 5055. The flight was headed from Warsaw to New York, with plans to continue to San Francisco. About an hour after takeoff, disaster struck. One of the engines, the number 2, suffered a deadly failure. A metal part inside broke apart at high speed, sending shards flying through the fuselage. The explosion destroyed 2 engines, tore through the flight control systems, and sparked a fire on board. The crew fought to keep control, but it was hopeless. The aircraft nosedived into the Kabati Woods near Warsaw. All 183 people on board died instantly. Investigators later found that the engine had a hidden defect: metal fatigue in its bearings. Poor maintenance and flaws in Soviet manufacturing had set the stage for disaster. After the crash, new safety rules were introduced: extra sensors, storage materials, better fire protection, and backup flight controls for similar aircraft. But just months later, Thailand faced its own nightmare. Thai Airways Flight 365 was flying a short domestic route to Phuket. As it approached the airport, air traffic control grew worried about another plane nearby. To stay safe, the Thai pilots slowed down too much. But they were already close to landing, and the plane stalled. The nose dipped, and the aircraft plunged into the Andaman Sea. All 83 people on board were killed. It happened in seconds. The investigation blamed both the pilots and the controller. Poor communication, unclear spacing between planes, and slow reaction sealed their fate. 1988. The exact number of aviation deaths that year is difficult to pin down, but 2 major tragedies alone claimed over 550 lives. One, the result of a terrorist bombing over a quiet town in Scotland. The other, a civilian airliner mistakenly shot down by military forces over the Persian Gulf. Pan Am Flight 103 was cruising over Scotland on its way from London to New York when, without warning, a massive explosion tore through the aircraft at 31,000 feet. The fuselage broke apart midair. Luggage, wreckage, and passengers fell into the quiet town of Lockerbie below. All 259 people on board were killed, along with 11 residents on the ground. The blast was caused by a bomb hidden in a suitcase in the cargo hold, a calculated act of terrorism. The tragedy exposed major flaws in airport security and baggage screening. In the aftermath, internal aviation authorities overhauled security protocols. Stricter baggage checks, passenger bag matching, and tighter intelligence coordination aimed at preventing anything like it from happening again. But then came an even more tragic event. Iran Air Flight 655, flying a regular passenger route, was mistaken for a hostile aircraft by the US Navy cruiser USS Vincennes. Without warning, the warship fired 2 missiles. The Airbus A300 was hit mid-air and broke apart. All 290 people on board were killed. It wasn't an accident. It was a mistake. Investigators found serious errors in radar reading, poor training, and failure to recognize the plane's civilian signals. The world was outraged. New rules for military engagement followed, along with compensation for the families. 1989. 1989 was another heartbreaking year in aviation. In the US alone, 278 lives were lost in commercial crashes, and worldwide, the death toll climbed even higher. It began with Suriname Airways Flight 764, a McDonnell Douglas DC-8 carrying 187 people from Amsterdam to Paramaribo. As the crew approached Zanderij Airport in heavy fog, they were cleared for a specific type of landing. But instead of following that, they used a different system that wasn't reliable at that airport. Warnings blared. The plane was too low. But still, it kept descending. Moments later, it clipped trees, flipped upside down, and crashed just short of the runway. Only 9 people survived. The investigation revealed chilling errors. The captain used a faulty navigation system knowingly. The crew ignored safety alerts and basic landing rules. Training had failed them, and oversight was missing. The crash exposed serious gaps in approach procedures and led to new rules to strengthen pilot training, especially for international crews operating under US authority. Then came a moment of both horror and heroism. United Airlines Flight 232 was flying across the US when disaster struck. A hidden crack inside the tail engine caused it to explode mid-flight. Shrapnel tore through all 3 hydraulic systems, wiping out the pilot's ability to steer the plane the normal way. But the crew didn't give up. With the help of a Czech pilot sitting in the cabin, they used engine power alone to guide the crippled aircraft towards Sioux City, Iowa. They crash-landed. The plane broke apart. 112 people died, but incredibly, 184 survived. That flight changed aviation forever. It exposed dangerous flaws in engine inspections, forced a redesign of backup systems, and proved how critical teamwork in the cockpit can be when everything else fails. 1992. With over 100 lives lost in major crashes, the year 1992 reminded us how fast things can go wrong, even when everything seems routine. Take El Al Flight 1862. It was a cargo Boeing 747 flying from New York to Tel Aviv, stopping in Amsterdam to refuel and switch crews. Not long after takeoff from Schiphol Airport, disaster struck. One of the right wing engines suddenly tore off. It wasn't just a freak accident. When that engine broke loose, it slammed into the second one, ripping it away too. Both engines fell off the wing, tearing into the aircraft systems and destroying its balance. The crew fought to control the plane, but it was impossible. Moments later, the 747 spiraled down and slammed into a block of apartment buildings in a neighborhood called Biljamarier. Everyone on board, just 4 crew members, died, but so did 43 people on the ground. Homes were destroyed and dozens more were injured. Investigators discovered the cause: tiny cracks in the engine mount pins, cracks that had been missed. After this, strict inspection rules were introduced for all jumbo jets, especially focusing on how engines are attached. Then came Martin Air Flight 495. It was a holiday flight from Amsterdam to Faro, Portugal, but as it neared the runway, a violent thunderstorm swept in. Wind shear and sudden downdraft slammed the plane down hard. The landing gear collapsed, a wing tore off, fire spread. The fuselage broke apart on the runway. Out of 340 on board, 56 people died. Many others were badly hurt, but many survived thanks to the quick emergency response. 1996. 1996 was a heartbreaking year for aviation. Around 1,840 people died in airline crashes that year, not even counting sabotage or hijackings. When related injuries are included, the number rises past 2,500. The first major disaster was horrifying. Saudia Flight 763 had just taken off from Delhi heading to Jeddah with 312 people on board. At the same time, Kazakhstan Airlines Flight 1907 was coming into land, but something went terribly wrong. Both planes were flying at the same altitude, 14,000 feet, and in a matter of seconds, they collided mid-air west of Delhi. The Kazakh plane's tail sliced through the Saudi's jet wing, and both aircraft broke apart and fell into fields below. All 349 people died instantly. Investigators blame poor communication, pilot error, and language barriers. After this, India made mid-air collision avoidance systems mandatory. Then came TWA Flight 800. A 747 heading from New York to Paris exploded in midair shortly after takeoff and crashed into the Atlantic Ocean. All 230 people on board were killed. At first, people feared it was a terrorist attack. But the truth was even more unsettling. A spark inside the fuel tank had triggered an explosion. A simple wiring issue led to a nightmare. Changes were later made to how fuel tanks are built and protected. Also adding up the Bergen Air Flight 301. It crashed just after takeoff from the Dominican Republic. A blocked pitot tube gave the pilots the wrong readings. Not realizing it was faulty, they stalled and the plane lost control. The jet crashed into the sea, killing all 189 on board. The pitot tube was likely clogged by a wasp nest after the plane sat unused.